Three main things: patience, patience, and patience. It takes a long time. The main thing is never stop. It's long, it's difficult, and you need to keep pushing. Year and a half, we didn't have a single dollar of revenue. Why? Because infrastructure takes a long time. In each country, everything's broken. When you need to move to different countries, you need to start that process all over again. Some of the best companies, they start to create their own markets, and Latin America is still way underdeveloped in terms of financial landscape and financial inclusion, and we are becoming backbone of that inclusion.
Tommy, it's a privilege to have you here in the Latitud podcast. We've been very excited to be supporters of Tapi with Latitud Ventures since the early days and to see you grow, scale as a founder and as a business. So welcome to the Latitud podcast.
Thank you very much, Tommy. It's really an honor to be here. I'm really happy to have met you such a long time ago and you to be a part of our history.
Tommy, to kick things off, why don't you share with the audience what is it that you're building at Tapi in your own words?
Yeah, it's not that easy, right? So Tapi is the largest payment network in Latin America. So basically we are connecting financial institutions, think about banks, neobanks, fintechs, even crypto companies and merchant acquirers with more than 30,000 billers and more than 60,000 stores across Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. Basically, we are allowing any bank to offer bill pay with one single connection across these 5 different countries. And at the same time, we are now offering fintechs and neobanks a possibility of allowing deposits and withdrawals of cash in more than 60,000 stores.
That's very cool. And I mean, our listeners are mostly tech founders, investors, but so again, for anyone that is kind of new to this world, in a way, what you're doing with Tapi, with your APIs, you're enabling Latin Americans that used to pay their bills maybe in tienditas to just basically do it from these platforms that they're already using in their phones, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Maybe if you're listening from the US or from Europe, this seems completely outdated and maybe it doesn't even make sense because who pays in cash? But if you think about it, even still now, we're in 2025, how long till fintech became a thing? I don't know, 8-10 years? And we still have 85% of the population in Mexico still paying their bills in cash and paying fees to do so. Even though fintech and actually tech in Latin America has gone a long way, there's still a long way to go, let's say.
Cool, Tommy. So maybe let's now take one step back or a few steps back and just share a little of your own journey and the company journey. And why did you become a founder in fintech? What was the fintech landscape like when you started a couple of years ago now, even though you're still super young?
Yeah, basically, I was living in London when I first came across fintech as something. Basically, back then I was working in corporate finance at a trading desk. Back then, I was trying to open up a bank account. I was struggling to do so. I was living in the UK and I came across Revolut. So I think I must have been one of the earliest members in Revolut.
We talked about London many times. I lived there for many years, but yeah, I became a Revolut user in 2016, I think, which is maybe not first, but quite early.
It was exactly that. I started to work at a bank, and imagine I couldn't open a bank account for 3 months. I came across Revolut, and 5 minutes later, I had all my paychecks deposited there. I was like, hey, this is amazing. That was the first time I saw something about fintech. Throughout the rest, let's say 2 or 3 years, I started thinking, hey, I need to do something with this. If this works in the UK, well, I say 95% of the population had digital bank accounts. Everything was working quite properly, let's say. In Latin America, we were in day 0 still. So after a couple of years, I decided that it was time to build something in fintech. To be honest, I never worked at a bank, let's say retail bank. I never did anything about technology, but I knew I wanted to do so. I came back to Argentina and I started my first venture, let's say. That was a wallet. Back then, of course, as any first-time founder, we made a lot of mistakes. But back then, fintech wasn't really a thing. The only thing that existed was actually Mercado Pago. Ualá was in its infancy. I think it had only raised their Series A or something like that. It was just starting. No one really knew what was like. It was very early days. We saw an opportunity and we started to build. Of course, the story changed a lot afterwards. but we started to build on the, let's say, on the retail side.
How old were you back then? 20, 25 maybe?
Yeah, I'm 32 now, so like, I think it was like 28, 27, 28, something like that.
So cool. So you started with a B2C wallet, and you kind of shared already the kind of the opportunity, the gap that you saw back then. What made you want to switch to what is now Tapi, right? To basically working maybe in the backstage, building infrastructure for enterprises, even for the end user, right? What was the process of ideating until you finally found Tapi's thesis?
Yeah, basically, like, we are seeing exactly the same opportunity as we did before. And so we are actually pursuing the same thing right now. That is, like, we still believe that Latin America is still way underdeveloped in terms of financial landscape and financial inclusion. The only difference is that instead of driving that inclusion and digitalization of the economy directly, we are now helping others that do it, to be honest, and we are becoming that backbone of that inclusion. We operated in the wallet like from, I think it's 2020 and 2021. So we started in 2020, and in 2021 we start to operate. Throughout that process, like, I will tell the story in a straight line. We all know it wasn't like that, but I think it's easier to understand it. But throughout that process, we saw three things that made us, at least that were the main reasons to change from Tap to Tapi. On one side, the infrastructure was completely broken. So we were a small fintech, like we had like 700,000 users, or like a couple of million payments per month, but we were struggling with the infrastructure. So providers, they had legacy technology, like everything was breaking down. I remember that we had like over like 70% of our engineering capacity in like over engineering and trying to hack the system to make it work for us. And I was like, hey, if this happens to us, what might happen to Mercado Pago or to Nubank or to Ualá or to anyone trying to build this way? So that was the first thing. And then the two others, let's say more market related. On one side, even though the opportunity was there, actually competing with the Mercado Pagos or the Nubanks or the Ualá in the retail, like we need to have like way more scale. Even though 700,000 users, it wasn't meaningless. It's still a long way to go to the scale needed for any B2C business. And then the third part is that we were building a very Argentina focused model that actually expanding into the different countries was becoming a hassle. Like, even like from a regulatory point of view, from a suppliers, like providers point of view, like everything is broken. Like in each country, everything's broken. But when you need to move to different countries, you need to start that process all over again. So we put everything together and we said, hey, like the opportunity is there. Providers are not up to the challenge of these big fintechs. And actually moving country to country, it's even worse. Why don't we focus entirely on building that infrastructure from scratch and trying to help all the big fintechs and, let's say, ride that wave that all the largest companies or the most important companies in the last 20 years of Latin America were doing, and trying to help them. So that was basically when we decided, let's forget about the B2C, let's work entirely on the infrastructure. And we started. And that was late 2021 when we started thinking about it. Early 2022, we were approached and we talked with several investors that actually backed us at a point where we didn't know exactly what we were going to build. So shout out to A16Z at that time, because they did trust us when we didn't have anything. And we started building. And like fast forward to today, like 3 years later, we are operating in the 5 countries: Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. We are working with more than like 40 financial institutions, processing like tens of millions of payments per month. So we're really happy, and I think it actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah, with the Diario del Lunes, as we say, I think it was a pretty good shot. And I think, Tommy, like as an investor, what you just described is what we call an unfair insight. No, like you saw firsthand. You had a company with 700,000 users, right? Like you were being successful, maybe not at the scale that you needed yet, but and you saw firsthand that issue, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking of the Pomelo guys. The Gaston saw the same thing in a neobank and decided to build on the whatever card processing issuing side. Cool. So before going back to Tapi for a second, I wanna tap your brain as a kind of an investor. I know you also are a good mentor to some founders. So if you think in LatAm you had the first wave of fintech with the B2C kind of fintechs, of course Nubank is one of the best examples in the world, up there with Revolut in many ways, and even beyond them in some ways. Then you had a kind of a wave of B2B companies, B2B payments, B2B neobanks, and then you had you could call the infrastructure or B2B2C, not always the same, right? But wave where you fall, where Pomelo falls, for instance. As a kind of an investor, as an angel investor, as a mentor, do you think these three buckets are fully captured? Do you still think there's opportunities in some of them? Or where do you think there's still gaps in LATAM, outside of Tapio, of course?
I think all of them are still viable as opportunities. I think it's actually it makes sense. Like when you think about it in a logical way, like there couldn't be a Tapi if there wasn't a Tap before, or there wouldn't be a Pomelo if there wasn't a Naranja X, or trying to build something on the B2C. So it makes a lot of sense of like first you get the B2C wave, that this happened maybe way earlier than us, let's say like Nubank in 2012 or Mercado Pago starting from, I remember seeing one email from Mercado Pago inside Mercado Libre in 2018, in 2008. So like it started way better, way earlier than us. So I think it's logical. Like first you need to get someone who's building at scale. Then when you start to get at scale, like, you say like can you keep building on, and you say, hey, like the next, let's say, profit pool or big market is actually businesses. So you get to B2B. And then you get the last stage, like when we came in, is like, hey, like you need someone to help these guys that are scaling so fast. And we start to build, let's say, B2B2C. So I think that it's a logical progression. But I think there is still a lot of place to build in all the spaces. Let's say, like, if you think about it, like you have said that, let's say, B2C wasn't available, or at least it was already crowded out. And then you have like in Argentina, you have like a lot of players like tapping into like investments or stable coins. So you still have a lot of trends going in that direction, like I know, Dollar App, Cocos, Velo, like you still have a lot of players that are coming into the B2C. Maybe that you like 3 years ago, you would have said like there's absolutely no place. B2B is something similar, like Payana. Like we know that there's still place, there's still a lot of things to do, and of course infrastructure. I think there are a lot of players like us building on separate, let's say, niches. Like we are on the bill pay and cash network part. Pomelo is building on the card issuing or card processing. But there are lots of things like KYC, KYB. Like there are still like now, and now I think AI opens the door to way more business models that we didn't thought about before. But of course, yeah. No, but I think the most important part, at least in fintech, is like you really need to know where you're getting into. And I think that's what was one of the things that made Tapi work, and like Pomelo and so many others.
Makes sense, man. Yeah, and I think AI is definitely one kind of underlying technology. I think crypto, especially stablecoins, will keep. I mean, we're seeing that how basically the financial system is slowly, but then suddenly transitioning also to the blockchain and to those new rails. Cool. So let's go back to Tapi. So you're already working with a few customers like Nubank, Mercado Libre, Mercado Pago that we've been talking about now. These are some of the largest enterprises in Latin America. So I think you will have some insights for many Latin American founders in terms of how to sell, how to integrate with large clients. What can you share in terms of basically your experience, your go-to market, and selling and then integrating with these giants? Again, maybe one or two insights that you could share with founders starting out.
So three main things: patience, and patience. I think so. It took a long. Now with it, after the joke, like it takes a long time. And I think the main thing is like never stop. It's long, it's difficult, and you need to keep pushing. Just to give an idea, like Tapi now might seem like that is working very good, but when we started the first, I think it was a year and a half, we didn't have a single dollar of revenue. Why? Because like infrastructure takes a long time. And even though like you say like Mercado Libre or Nubank, they're very, say, tech first companies, like it still takes a lot of time. Like APIs, they take a lot of time. And enterprise, it's even worse. So I think here I have to give a shout out to Kevin. Kevin's my partner, and he's the one who has been instrumental to working with these companies. I think one of the things that you need to be somewhat crazy like he is, that he's absolutely in the most simple detail. He's pushing, he's creating relationships, and at the same time, like you need to keep being there, because in enterprises, something that I think is not that well understood is like it's never a push sale. Like you can never force Mercado Libre or no one to choose you. Like you need to be there, you need to provide the best solution possible, and they will come when they're ready. But you need to be there like for 2 years, 3 years, and it will come.
Well, double clicking on your experience with Tapi, which of course is a certain type of business with APIs. Be there means landing small and then upselling and then growing, or being there means build a relationship, show your product, demo your product?
Both. Whatever, like getting your foot in the door is, I would say, is the most important part. And then like growing from within, it's way, way more easier. Even that might take a lot of time. So you need to keep building those relationships. We need to keep working and to see like exactly what they're looking for, what they appreciate in a product like yours, if they're looking for a product like yours. And then something more tactical maybe is that what Tapi, one of the key things in the value proposition of Tapi is actually being regional. So the single API, single connection for the 5 different countries actually made it easier for Tapi to land, because it takes out a lot of the work. Maybe countries that they have less resources, they can launch with you because they had launched before in a different country. So you get all of these, let's say, little wins that finally they end up like being the thing that, like, let's say, tips over and you start working with them. And then, of course, one of them, they move earlier. And when they move earlier, then it's easier to get to the rest. And then, of course, Tapi is a very, let's say, network-driven company. So more clients means more billers, and more billers means more clients. And it starts to be easier and easier.
Absolutely. No, I do remember, I mean, with some of these companies in one market and then maybe going live with them a couple of quarters after. But as you say, I think the regional value prop was very important there. Tommy, so let's double click a second in your kind of pan LatAm business, right? I mean, we could spend hours talking about this. We won't deep dive in every market in the region, but very briefly, I think comparing the different markets, what do you think is different depending on the country that you look at, maybe in terms of regulation, in terms of stage? What can you share there?
So basically, as I said before, like LATAM, even though we talk about one region, countries are completely different one from another in terms of everything, regulation, in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of the players inside these markets. I will do like a very brief summary of where we see it. So Argentina, even though like we are still, a lot of things needs to keep evolving in Argentina. Actually, the financial technology or financial ecosystem, it works really, really well. So you have, like, we have a Pix-like system, like for the past 15 years, like everything works really well. And I think actually the Mercado Pago, Naranjas, Ualá, and actually banks, they have done a great job of expanding that reach and actually amplifying that ecosystem. On the other side, I think on the other end of the spectrum, I think you have Mexico, where you have all, like, where you still have like 50% of the population without bank accounts, where, as I said, we have 85% of the people still paying in cash their bills. And I think Mexico still needs a lot of development. And like, we're talking about Mexico, that must have been like the second country that received the most investment, not only in venture capital, but also in terms of investment from like traditional banks or enterprise companies in transforming Mexico. So I think there's a question mark. We truly believe that we are in an inflection point in Mexico. Like, let's say, like 1 year ago, you could open your bank account with Nubank, for example, with just a few clicks. But if you had cash in your pocket and you collected your paycheck in cash, like you didn't have any ramps to actually uh, deposit that cash and start operating digitally. So even though there was a lot of investment, still there weren't any like ramps for cash to come into the digital economy. And I think that's changing now. Like Tapi has been working thoroughly to create the first cash network in Mexico. The acquisition of Arcus actually expanded and created a very robust network in Mexico. And I think we are in the first days of an inflection point of Mexico that now like Nubank, Mercado Libre, Stori, like all Ualás, all these kind of players are starting to accept cash. And I think this is where we will see the biggest change or the biggest acceleration uh, in that line in Mexico. But anyways, like I think we need to see it. Even though like we are seeing this, it will not happen overnight. It will not happen, let's say, in the next 6 months. Uh, but I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 12 months or like 2, 3 years, we could double the amount of people like operating digitally. And then maybe Colombia, like one final thought in Colombia is like Colombia has always been very tough from a regulatory side and from a, let's say, technological side. I think Breve might actually change things, but it's way too early still to tell.
Very cool, Tommy. And I think, yeah, I mean, we don't know what will happen in Mexico, especially, or in Colombia, but I think you have a front row seat to both countries, no? And in the payment regulation and innovation landscape. So that's great. I think this is also cool for US investors looking at the region. You quickly mentioned something quite important for Tapi's history, which is the acquisition of Arcus this year, right? So let me do a quick recap. About a year ago, you raised a Tapi pretty large Series A round for Latin America, 22 million Series A round, led by Kaszek and Andreessen Horowitz, which already was an investor in, as you mentioned in your early round with Latitud, and many other investors. So you raised that Series A round, and you a couple of months ago, you completed the acquisition of Arcus in Mexico. What does that mean for Tapi? And what's next for you guys after this big milestone?
Yeah. So last month we announced our acquisition of Arcus. For you who don't know, Arcus was a company founded by Mexican entrepreneurs that was acquired by Mastercard back I think 2021 or 2022, and has been operated within Mastercard for the past 3 years. Arcus basically does something similar to Tapi. So we both run a bill pay infrastructure. They only work in Mexico, and they had a lot of agreements with several companies, and at the same time they were running a cash network with most relevant client and partner is being the OXXO stores receiving cash for Nubank users as a first start. So for Tapi, this was a transformational milestone for us. I think as a company, we doubled in size of almost everything that you can think of, like in terms of revenues, in terms of like the number of stores that we reach, the number of clients. So for us, it is quite transformational. And I think this opens up the door to actually uh, transform the Mexican ecosystem. So we are now working with most of the big traditional banks in Mexico. That was one of the key things that Arcus was able to do. We are working with most of the fintechs as well, and we have now the largest cash network in the country. So I think this is the moment where uh, we start to move the needle actually from those 15% paying digitally to I don't know 30, 40, 50% in the next couple of years. And actually I think what we need to do is keep working, keep expanding the market. Like to give you another example, like in Argentina we have more than 8,000 billers in our network. Like in Mexico, we are the largest player by far, and we only have like 500. So there's still a long way to go in order allow more schools, universities, insurance companies, like even real estate, gas companies to start receiving payments digitally. And I think that's something that we will focus entirely in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months.
That's amazing. Congrats again on that acquisition. I know it was a long process. That brings me to a question I had, Tommy, which is how do you manage prioritization within Tapi in terms of launching markets, launching products, launching clients? But I also want to embed here. I always told you what I always saw in you is someone that you said you didn't know anything about tech, but then yeah, you built a B2C wallet to 700,000 users, right? So you know about tech, you know about product, you know about business, but you also have this toolkit where you can at least assess, let's call it inorganic growth, M&As, as one resource that you have as a founder. Because as a founder, in the end, yeah, you're a tech founder, but you're also, yeah, I mean, you're running a business, you're a businessman, and you should be using every tool at reach, right? So maybe share a little bit of how you, I mean, how you tackle those opportunities. Maybe you can use the Argos example, or maybe some other examples in your mind. But I think it's actually this. I think this question is quite relevant to many founders in LatAm or even abroad that only think they can grow whatever through the traditional growth and sales channels, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's not an easy question to answer because it will sound like I'm not answering almost at all. Uh, when like I was born in a house where like these kind of transactions were let's say common in a way. So I think that I have the advantage of, let's say, like thinking about it like more like an everyday thing. But I think the most relevant factor that makes this possible is actually like we had a great business. We were running it quite efficiently, and we were doing, I think, in everything in a good way, and we were prepared for it. Like we didn't know if it would come. Like we were thinking about it might happen sometime, but we were ready when the opportunity came. And what this meant was actually we had great investors backing us. Like we had Kaszek and Nico Sekasi especially like backing us. We had a very healthy balance sheet. We had a very healthy, let's say, operation. And when it came, like it was just complementary to what we were doing. It was like it had a lot of synergies. Uh, and whenever it came, like we just went full force and tried to close it as soon as possible. And look, like this is something that probably will be in the scope of what Tapi does in the future. I think at the same time, Tapi is a business that maybe it it allows itself to actually acquire companies differently than maybe like the the normal like SaaS company where you have to integrate a lot of products. Uh, and I think we need to be ready. Whether like we are still growing a lot, we're growing like like 4 or 5x year on year organically. We are doing this M&A. I think we have better opportunities to actually keep growing like that over the next year or so, based on what we discussed on the like only on the digital payments market in Mexico. Uh, and I don't know, like maybe it will happen. It will happen again in the future. But again, like M&As are very opportunistic. Like if this happened, like we received an email, I think it was like January of this year, like inviting us to the process of the sale of Arcus. Like maybe like if it happened like 1 year ago, 1 year before, like we didn't have the cash to do so. So maybe like raising in order to pursue M&A is not that easy as well, because it's two transactions that need to happen at the same time. Like maybe if this came like in 3 years, like maybe it didn't make sense because Tapi would have had to like build all of it from scratch. So like like M&As, they are very opportunistic. Like we need to be ready, but like you never know if it will come at a good time, man. Thankfully, like this, all of it like came together at the right moment.
That makes sense. Timing is important. I think, Tommy, in a way, if I summarize what you said, is okay. You were in a strong capital position because you had raised the Series A on the back of the business you were building with Tapi organically. But you had you had the prepared mind, you had the terms, you had the capital, you had a prepared kind of mind. You had a prepared analysis of the market, and you were open to it. No, I think you came into the process with an open mindset, and then you did the work. And I know it was a lot of work. So again, hats off. Cool. I think we're getting to the last question here. Again, thinking of just balancing in the audience here among investors and founders. As you know, at Latitud, we're always like trying to support founders in the very, very early stages. So the question is, I mean, and we can talk about this M&A. It's been only 3 years, literally, since you basically 3 and a bit, no? In these 3 years of Tapi, you raised a couple of rounds from top investors. You bought your largest competitor in Mexico, at least. You refined your thesis. You scaled the business. What advice can you share to founders born in LatAm that are starting out, that are looking to build really big, ambitious startups, venture-backed, venture-scaled startups, especially in this world of kind of AI, an AI super cycle? What are your 2 or 3 learnings and pieces of advice for them?
I would say like 3. I think 3 main pieces of advice. The first one is to aim big. I know it's a cliche, but like you need to build in a place where you think that you can get to a very big place, and that you have a reasonable chance to think that you have a right to win there. So that's it. That's the first one.
That seems obvious, but unpacking that, someone said like it takes the same effort to build something in a 30 billion market than in a 300 billion market. Probably, I would say less effort because you have more pull from demand. I always tell founders, do the homework. Like if you're not good at market sizing, talk to your friend that works at McKinsey and just get them to help read understanding the market opportunity.
Yeah, then it does have its different sides or different points of view. Like Tapi wasn't that much of a huge market, or at least when we first started. But I think like some of the best companies, they start to create their own markets, and we knew that market was going to expand, and we are seeing that. But I think that's the first part, because if you want to build a venture scale business, you need to account for that as a start. And then the other part is like when you start building, like be very thoughtful on how you're building, and be very you need to be very flexible and adapt a lot on how you want to do it. I always like to be very efficient in the way I run Tapi, at least, and I think that leaves that's the path that leaves most let's say opportunities open. And I think that's something that I always like to keep. I don't want to be like, at least on my side, like burning capital and keeping like I don't know, 3 months or 6 months runway, and then going to raise, because I know that if I do that, like I only have one chance, or I only have one way of doing that. Let's say if I run it efficiently and I'm not burning any cash, and I still have a lot of runway, like I have 2 choices. I could still be growing the same way without getting any new dilution, or I could start actually go and raise capital at better terms. Or I have a third option, that is actually you can even raise debt because you're profitable. So like you can do that. So I think that's just an example, but I always like to keep it very efficient, and at the same time try to keep my options open. And this, you can take it in terms of capital, you can take it in terms of like product. Of course, at some points you need to go all in. Like we did go all in and open up in 5 countries without a single client. But these are calculated risks. So I think that's one of the like, to be very flexible. And being flexible is not only in being efficient, but being flexible in terms of like time changes. Like when we raised our seed round, it was like early 2022. Like the back then the timing was like, or at least the focus was like, grow as fast as possible, burn money, it doesn't matter. Like 6 months later, like it was like emergency, like this is there, like we need to keep capital. I think now we are in the process of going through a second wave of let's say more interest in Latin America. So you need to be able to read properly the market. be flexible, and then I think being efficient actually makes it way more easier to actually then decide what's the best way for you.
What's the third one?
I think it was flexible and efficient. Like your
Okay, good.
two things. I mixed them up, but those.
Makes sense. Tommy, let me ask you, we're connected to the having optionality, having the control over when you go out to raise. So you raised how much already across different
32
Correct.
actually. Yeah.
From the best investors in LatAm and in the US. So last question here. What's your main learning in terms of fundraising? From whom, when, how? What can you share?
It's an art more than a science. Like there's no correct way to do it. Like it changes a lot, like company to company, or even like each part of the cycle changes a lot. What you need to do, and that's why I think being flexible it's a good thing. Like sometimes you need to grow very fast, sometimes you need to be efficient. So I think that's part. But I think one of the most relevant things that I would say is if I had to look back is like choose the partners who you will be working with. Like it's not that much about the funds itself, but the people, especially in early stage. Like maybe when you get to like Series B, Series C, like we are not there yet. But like it might change. It's more like say governance and more documents and more legal stuff. But when you're starting, like you need to choose your partner. You need to choose like you will have like 10 bad days for every single good day that you have. And you need to have someone that not only like supports you and real supports, but also understands what you're going through. And I think choosing the right fund or the right partner for each stage, I think that's something that's really, I think that's a very big learning that we have.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Really appreciate the time, and again, appreciate our partnership. I know for sure we'll see Tapi grow even more and get to go even higher. So yeah, it will be very cool to watch that conceit. Congrats again, and thanks for being here.